Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Turn the Page, the official podcast of Syosset Public Library. I'm Jen, your host today, and I'm here with the team behind a really fascinating new book about Black metal. Could I ask you to introduce yourselves and your book, please?
So I'm Daniel Lugs. I'm a writer and editor based in Montreal, and I don't know, we're excited to be on the show and to talk about black metal rainbows.
My name is Jaci Raia. I'm a creative director based in Burlington, Vermont, and I was the design aspect of the book.
Hey, I'm Stanimir Panayotov. I'm teaching philosophy and cultural studies at the School of Advanced Studies at the University of Tyumen in Siberia, and I'm one of the co-editors of the book.
Thank you so much for coming, and I'm really excited to talk about this. And the first thing I wanted to talk about before we get into the book itself is just, your backgrounds, because something that really marks the book out is very unique and special is that you all come from pretty different backgrounds, and you have brought together a host of collaborators who all come from very different perspectives and different careers and paths and things like that. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you've worked on in the past, how you met around this project, and how it came to be.
Okay, I can go first. So I'm originally from the UK, but I grew up in Italy. And in Italy, as a teenager, is when I started getting into sort of heavy music, starting with Nirvana and grunge and industrial, and then gradually sort of through friends at school, kind of getting into death and black metal. Then I moved to the UK. I moved back to the UK, where I started working as a music journalist while I was in college. So that kind of gave me opportunity to sort of start writing about metal in a sort of professional way. So when I went back to grad school at New York University, which is where you and I met originally, I had the opportunity to sort of I was doing a PhD in comparative literature, so one of the areas I was sort of looking at was popular culture, extreme music, from the perspective of masculinity and gender studies. So how, in a sense, what we now call toxic masculinities are sort of dealt with through music subcultures. So basically, in a nutshell, we met around this project. I originally met Stanimir through a colloquium that I was part of organizing in 2015. So this was it was a symposium. It was a black metal theory symposium called Coloring the Black. And the goal of that symposium was to sort of kind of bring a bit of color and a bit of queerness to this field of black metal theory, which was a sort of para-academic area, which began, I think, around 2009 or so by a professor at CUNY called Nicola Masciandaro. So Masciandaro started putting together this group of people, but there was sort of opportunity, it was, and then we can sort of get into black metal theory. I know that Stanimir has a lot to say about that, but there was opportunity to sort of bring a kind of queer studies critique to that field. So from this symposium in Dublin in 2015, that's kind of where the book came from. So it originally stemmed from that.
Okay, I'm largely black metal disappointment for people around me. I don't have a specific an exciting history about black metal in my life. I guess I come from kind of teenage angst background where you go with grunge, industrial, but that's about it. Black metal is something that came much later in my life, and it didn't come in any in any predictable way. I've always been excited about particular strands of black metal that are kind of easily labeled as gay by the mainstream. I guess I have the episodes of my life where I discuss with people what kind of black metal I listen to, and they're like, oh well, that's not really black metal. But other than that. I've already had some writing, quite occasional on music. I've published several pieces, a couple of them on some Bulgarian bands actually over time. And when Daniel reached out after the symposium he mentioned in 2015, that was early 2016, I think, I gave it some thought, and I like to write about music, but I've never had a lot of experience with that. But on the other hand, I come largely from gender and queer studies, and on the other hand, I thought, well, that might be an interesting opportunity to kind of expand my knowledge and see what's interesting in general from an even kind of musicology perspective, in queering certain material. So there we have it. Almost 6-7 years later, we have this behemoth of a book, which is now breathing the air of existence. I think the other, yeah, as Daniel mentioned, the other thing was that at the time, black metal theory was kind of fashionable, if you will, field of academic interest and participation, and I do believe Daniel, I, and many others were kind of interested in what's going on. The symposium he did mention was kind of pushing a little bit to the edges the field of black metal theory. I don't recall people necessarily antagonizing this field, but rather trying to kind of make a point that it does need certain opening. And I think this is just, I guess, the last point, which is both about black metal theory and beyond, generally what was going on at the time in humanities and philosophy, was that at the time, so we're talking about 2015, and this is to an extent still going on, the last 15 years in humanities have generally seen a interesting turnaround when it comes to theory and what is theory in general, which means that people have vouched for kind of throwing under the bus cultural specificity. And this is one thing that was slightly present in black metal theory as well. So I think one thing that happened with the book was sort of like, wait, we need to actually consider black metal as a particular field and its theorizing from a perspective that it hasn't really seen. I wouldn't say this is like a kind of some kind of grandiose scheme and program of ours, but I think this is something we've been doing all along, to kind of slightly, at least for me, to kind of slightly resist this universalizing tendency in theory.
So my background is just straight up design. I have a BFA in graphic design that I got from school, art school. And design and metal really have always been my two like favorite things in the entire world. My boyfriend in high school was like, you have to listen to Metallica and Black Sabbath. And he was like, you have to know their names. And to this day, whatever, like 23 years later, like they are still my favorite bands. But that was also like the beginning of the slide down into just disgusting metal of like, like it's definitely, it was like a trajectory of like more entry level stuff all the way down to like weird black and death metal that I listen to now. And then so like I went to school and I was like, in the art studio listening to like Dimmu Borgir and like Children of Bodom as I was like making books for fun. Because like books have always been my favorite thing to design, and I've never actually gotten a chance to design like a real deal book like this before, which was Daniel and Stanimir approached me and they were like, hey, do you want to submit a piece of art for this book? Because I had done some work in like the field before. Like I've done some work for like Invisible Oranges, and I've done work for like Maryland Death Fest, and like just a bunch of like logos and like album art, t-shirts, like just everything. And so they had probably come across my work somewhere. And I was like, I'm not really like an artist, because I also feel like I've had this argument with a lot of my friends that like design is not art. But I was like, I will design your book for you because this sounds like a dream project. And I was like, this is something that I really care about. I also I think that metal is and should be pushing boundaries and staying stagnant and like accepting black metal for what it typically is, which is generally like white and male and angry, is not really what the world is about right now. So they said, yeah, we'll have you design a book proposal, which I was like, hell yeah. So like we did that, and the book proposal came out really awesome, I think. And they sold it into a publisher, and they were like, the design of this book is so important and integral to just its existence that we want you to come on as co-author. And I was like super like appreciative of that, because I think a lot of the times design kind of like falls by the wayside. It's an important aspect of everything. Like I think, like we might not even realize it. Like when you go into a store and you buy something because the packaging is like nice and it speaks to you, like that's design. Like you react to it even though you might not realize. So like to have the design aspect of something like this be appreciated that much, it goes a long way. And I think it's a great gesture. So I was very excited to do that.
That's so cool. And I really love, that the design is such a big part of it. Because I think a lot of people, tend to see design as mere like illustration, like as something that is like subordinated to the text and just supports it in a way. But in this book, you really do see like the text and the visual aspects interacting in a real way. And I think like the design really like supports the thesis of the book too. So let's get into that, like, because the heart of this book really is that like black metal right now, as you see it, is a kind of cultural battleground. And the terms that you use in the book are quote, between nationalism and conservatism, and on the other hand, quote, open, inclusive, and unlimited. So can you talk a little bit about like, why we are at this moment with black metal and what intervention you're seeking to make with this book?
So I think you've hit the nail on the head, as it were. There are I think the book does three things or two things which are all sort of interconnected. So on the one hand, we really wanted to sort of open up the kind of aesthetics of black metal. So black metal is kind of traditionally known as this sort of black and white or grayscale sort of music or aesthetic, especially with the corpse paint. So the sort of the black and the white creates this sort of very limiting view of black metal, which is also sort of tied into its perception as something very sort of grim or sort of frostbitten. It's about winter and solitude and sort of misery and rage and all these things, but there's so much more to black metal. There always has been. So we sort of wanted to open it up on multiple levels, and two of those levels would be the sort of the political aspect. So black metal has a Nazi problem, it's a genre which, because of its development, partly because Burzum is one of the sort of founders of second wave black metal. So, stemming from that sort of wing of the genre, there has been over the last 20 or so years this development of National Socialist black metal. So NSBM. A lot of these bands are in Eastern Europe. So this has kind of been an unfortunate sort of development of the genre. But there has also been a sort of pushback against that. So what we kind of want to document in the book is sort of, the kind of left-wing response to that, the sort of red and anarchist black metal. So RABM has had a huge kind of opening up and development over the last couple of decades. And we see, culture across the board is so polarized now. We are living in these culture wars. So I think we felt it was kind of important, since we are fans of black metal, to kind of make this statement that many others are making, that Nazis do not own the genre. They do not, they claim it, but they do not have any right to sort of claim the genre as their own. So in a sense, there's a kind of attempt to sort of, wrestle it back and say, well, actually, there's way much more to black metal than just a bunch of Nazis. So part of the deal here was to sort of illustrate, what black metal is, what it can be, and sort of take that to sort of take this public image of black metal, which is very cliched, and sort of, kind of explode it or dig into it, or sort of, shatter this kind of black and white, and sort of show the kind of all the different shards of the spectrum. And then the other aspect, so the third aspect will be the aspect of gender. So, as Jaci pointed out, it's a very sort of typically male, white male dominated genre. There's this sort of there's a kind of universalism, the false universalism going on in black metal, like, oh, I'm an equal opportunity hater, I'm a misanthrope, I hate everyone equally. But when you dig into it, it's not the case. Often it's some sort of like embittered or entitled stand for sort of revanchist or reactionary male whiteness, which is sort of pushing back against, what they see as sort of like wokeness or liberalism or what have you. And so for us, it was important to sort of document this huge explosion that there's been in black metal in the last decade or so, with trans artists, queer artists. It has really sort of, it's having a renaissance in terms of, this genre is for outsiders. So it makes sense. And this is one of our blurbs. A musician from the band Vile Creature makes this point that, black metal has always been a genre for sort of outsiders. So it makes sense that queer people, trans people, women and minorities are sort of have kind of embraced the genre as a place where they can sort of express their identity, express their art, and so forth.
Yeah, I guess Daniel really summarized well most of the points around kind of the political contest going on around black metal. I will just focus very briefly on kind of, I guess, an example that does have to do with gender and kind of the politics of black metal. Before you can actually go and say there's a renaissance of black metal that's not normative in the sense that people associated with NSBM and horrible fandoms like that. You have to actually kind of slow down perceptually people's kind of agenda and try to expose what the norm is. And I think one of the very basic things this book is doing is sort of saying, wait, if you think that people, men specifically, in corpse paint and leather and S&M gear running through forests is masculine, then you kind of have a problem, right? So I mean, the idea is to first kind of crack into this kind of idea of normative masculinity within black metal and expose it as not normative, because it's really not. I mean, the whole kind of perception of masculinity in black metal is so unique before you try to queer it or anything, because it's just so weird that society has agreed that, this particular form of masculinity is actually normative, whereas it's absolutely not as soon as you go outside the framework of the outcasts, right? Like the social figure of the outcast. And so once you kind of slow down the perception of people around this, then you can make a whole other bunch of things, like say, black metal is just queer. It's absolutely not about toxic masculinity. And those who claim that it is white and masculine, I mean, even if you have the whiteness issue, they're completely, berserk. This isn't really the case. So I guess, politically, this is like a big kind of, I guess it was a kind of big challenge to make a collection of things, because the book has various elements, right? We have different types of text, we have artist submission, and we have the design aspect of it, which is artistic, as we discussed. So when you put all the things together, the kind of, this is like the kind of second part of the agenda, but the first part is no, it's this white masculinity, trash talk around black metal, it just isn't there, basically.
That's super interesting to me because I think that speaks to a way that a lot of people misunderstand queer theory and the goal of queering things. Like, I've had to explain to a lot of students that, like, no, you're not like adding queerness, like you are not like doing something, you are revealing what's already there, like you are just shifting your perspective a little bit in order to see something for what it really is. Like, you are not, but I'd like to talk a little bit about how that goal plays into the way that you've chosen so many voices to comprise this book, and the process that you talked of putting this whole thing together. Like, when you're putting something together like this that has so many perspectives, so many voices, so many media, like, how do you aim for coherence in how you organize it, or do you just let it be messy, let it be what it is? Like, does that make sense as a question? I hope I said something.
Yeah, perhaps Jaci can speak to the aspect of sort of messiness, sort of chaos, and order, perhaps from an aesthetic perspective. I think black metal has those two poles. So it has this sort of yearning for order, which can end up in sort of, fascistic fantasies. But on the other hand, it's a sort of embracing of the chaos of the world and the universe. So Jaci, I don't know if you
Yeah, I mean, I think to create, I mean, part of my job was to create like a visual language that kind of brought everything together with a sense of consistency. But one of the adjectives that was used a lot during the very beginning of this project was that, we want to embrace chaos and we want it to look kind of chaotic because the genre is chaotic and the content is chaotic, and that should definitely be reflected in the design, and it is. There is a lot of just like crazy textures that are layered all together and like stuff like that, and like there's like a consistent element where I actually just took like the pen tool and InDesign and like drew scribbles, and like that was one of like the consistent elements of the book, even though everything is so varied and like so different and the voices are all different, the art is all different, like there is like small things like that kind of like bring it together. It's like a through thread that like runs through the design. So that's kind of what I did, but I also, like I wanted to, embrace the chaos, and like I did my best, because that is very much not how I design at all. Like, like just like crazy colors and like chaotic shapes and like things that don't follow a grid, and like rainbow gradients and stuff. Like it was very much outside of my comfort zone, but I think also the visual language kind of became an element of the book itself. It embraces the different types of content that there is, but it also stands alone on its own.
If I could ask one follow-up on that, when you were designing the book, how do I phrase this? Did you find yourself with your design responding to individual pieces, or did you try to sort of like address the work as a whole? Or like, so like when did you encounter it? Like, was it already a full collection when you came to design, or were you working with it along the way? Or
Everything came to me pretty much complete because, you know, like I was kind of starting to like develop the look and feel, you know, before we got the content, and like that was basically taken from the proposal because the proposal is like almost like exactly the same. But like everything came to me as like a, you know, like a bulk like Dropbox download, and I was like, all right, I have everything, like let's take a look. And as I was putting everything in, I did react specifically to each piece. I like, you know, like the little like scribbles that I would draw, like I would use them to like call attention to a different like an aspect of the writing, or I would use it to kind of like put your eye into like the piece of artwork that was on the page. I used it as a way to like underline or like bracket like text where I thought, you know, like maybe this is like particularly important, or underlines or something. So like I read every piece as you should, as you're if you're doing a book, and like I used it as a way to like support and enhance the content itself. So yes, everything was like very painstakingly done.
that's super interesting because you know, before I ended up in libraries, I came from studying medieval history, and a lot of times when I was reading the book, I thought like, oh, this like sometimes feels like an illuminated manuscript, you know, where like the imagery really is calling your attention to the text. It's not just this sort of like, you know, layer on top of it that doesn't interact with it, like it is speaking to the text. Did you Daniel and Stanimir, did you find yourself surprised by any of the design when you encountered it, or did you feel like it illuminated things in the text that you weren't aware of? Did it give you a new perspective in any way?
I think your comment about it looking like an illuminated manuscript is such a great compliment. I love that. I think it has you know, I'm interested in graphic novels. I've taught graphic novels, and you've also written a graphic novel. So I think and there are also some comics in Black Metal Rainbows as well. So I sort of love the sort of interplay between images and words. And I think, you know, going slightly back to the sort of chaos and order aspect of it, you know, I love like very kind of messy sort of avant-garde comics, underground comics, like stuff like Le Dernier Cri, which is a French publisher, which is all their stuff is very, very chaotic and messy. But on the other hand, I really love sort of classic orderly design, like Trina and Kim is a great Norwegian design studio that have done several black metal albums. And so I think the book does and Jackie did an amazing job of sort of like, you know, sort of going between these two poles, and also thinking about, you know, sort of the past and the future. I think we wanted a futuristic sort of aspect to it, a sort of glitchy kind of digital sort of aspect to it as well. And one of the influences is Rob Sheridan, who was the graphic designer for Nine Inch Nails for a long time, and he wrote a very kind blurb for our book. And so, you know, thinking about the futuristic aspect, where black metal can go, where it's going next, is something that we wanted to sort of embrace, because black metal is sort of, there's a lot of backward looking sort of medievalism and sort of traditionalism there, but there are also trends in black metal, like especially during the 90s, the late 90s, where there was a lot of futuristic black metal. So like mixing black metal with electronica, with industrial, with noise, thinking about sort of how the genre could sort of progress outwards. It's something we wanted to sort of replicate in the book, and I think I'm really happy how it turned out. I think it really does kind of take you on a journey, as it were, through the images and through the design. And I think Jaci just did an amazing job with it.
Yeah, to the extent to which this is something of an illuminated manuscript, as you say, that's great, so long as people don't perceive it as, I don't know, the Wojtek Codex or the Seraphinus Codex, right? Because that's a different kind of illumination, and I don't think Jaci has crossed this line. As she said, that she did receive all the material, which is just the way should be done in general when it comes to designing such a complicated book, and she already had a template, but I just don't want to stress out that there's like two, at least from my perspective, two aspects of this book visually that I think are kind of speaking to each other in probably not a very explicit way. One is the book cover, which was a particular discussion. It was a separate discussion and a separate decision on what is going to be on the book cover and how should we treat that. And one thing that we ended up doing, we do hope that this is visible in some way, is that the book cover's message is yes, black metal is this kind of queer, kind of underground of wild things going on inside.
One thing I like to do when I write is I like to start with the title and sort of just kind of see where that title takes me. And the title Black Metal Rainbows, it sort of came from Stanimir's paper at the Coloring the Black symposium was called Sad Rainbows. So I thought, Black Metal Rainbows just sort of, in a sense, kind of says it all. So basically, we sort of identified, some of the people were at the conference, like Drew Daniel. So some people just expanded on their paper or gave us a version of their conference paper. Other people, we just approached them from scratch. And basically, we gave people freedom to sort of, we had a little blurb about what the book was going to be about. So we would approach people and just sort of ask them, how does this speak to you? And would you like to contribute? So there was sort of freedom for people to do that. And I think one aspect of the book that we wanted to be accessible. So one of the problems with black metal theory, and I think Stanimir has some thoughts about this too, is that some of it tended towards that sort of obscurantist, sort of Nietzschean, deep theory kind of style of writing, which is, it has its value, but we didn't want this to be a dense academic book. So while there are some chapters which are sort of have a kind of theory heavy or academic sort of approach, there are many others that are sort of written in a journalistic way. There are personal essays, there are sort of interviews with musicians, label owners, and so forth. So we wanted to sort of make the book diverse, accessible, exciting. You can dip into it, you can go back and forth, and it has a kind of sort of riotous, carnivalesque sort of feel to it, where the elements are sort of jostling against each other, but the concept, the title kind of holds the concept together, and you can interpret it and take it in so many directions, whether it's about politics, whether it's about aesthetics, whether it's about gender, and so forth. So it's a sort of umbrella, as it were, under which all these different elements hopefully sort of coexist in some interesting way.
No, I was just saying that I think there was just like this kind of message in the cover, which is kind of both about tradition and invention at the same time. But then the book is really not so much about what is considered traditionalist, and I think the design to a large extent just reflects that.
Yeah, I think the design speaks really interestingly to the book's thesis, or maybe not its thesis, but something that I think it illustrates really well is that outside of academia, I think there is this view of theory that it is very restrictive, or that it's like a template that you try to fit a text into or whatever. But this book really shows that like theory can be very playful and very expansive and like, yeah, chaotic. Like it's not necessarily a system for order. It can be, and chaos can be productive, as I think we see here.
Well, the word chaos comes from a ancient Greek verb. This is one of the theories about this particular verb, but I side with this particular theory because it's not definitive. But the word chaos comes from the verb kasko, which means gaping. Something that's gaping, and therefore it's not something you can necessarily kind of close or control, right? And I think in this sense, chaos is also like a very good concept that worked well. But also, I just wanted to mention, one other aspect, and then sorry if I jump in the middle of another question here, but I just wanted to mention another aspect of the visual side, which is the fact that there is work done on other people's visual narratives, which is to say, this isn't people just submitting artworks to us and we just put them on the book, but they become part of the book's own language, which requires, in this case, Jaci's intervention, right? Because it's not the same thing to have somebody submit a good scan of their work and just put it on a page, and it's very different when in terms of what Jaci does. She works on the background. She decides how to put the work's credits, where to put them, etc., etc. So this is also a very different approach to creating a visual culture of black metal, in a sense.
I really want to thank you for coming to speak to me about this book, and I'm really excited for our listeners to encounter it. And I think it really, I think it's a really great book to visit again and again. Like it obviously, like for this interview, I read it cover to cover, but in the time since then, I've also just sort of dipped in and out of it and revisited pieces and visuals that I really enjoyed. And it's just like, it's a really nice piece for contemplation too, So thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, and thank you for asking such good, thought-provoking questions. And also thank you for calling it akin to an illuminated manuscript. I will ride that high for days.
You can put it on your resume if you like, and put my phone number. I'll back it up, All right, listeners. Well, Black Metal Rainbows is available near you as of the time that you hear this. So please, please, please pick it up at your favorite independent bookstore or library, wherever you get your books. Thank you very much for listening. This is Jen, and it is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.